How's it going? Kevin Cleary here with another knife video for you. This time I'm going to be indulging my love of Brian Tye. This is the CRKT Tighecoon. It is a production version of a Brian Tye custom. Now this knife has some differences. One, size, materials of course, which is always different, but there are other departures. These rubberized inserts are not in the custom, and the blade is not fluted like on the custom. So there are more differences between this and the original Brian Tye Tighecoon than some of the other CRKT Brian Tye collaborations. Anyway, that's okay. It's still a nice knife, and it has a great place in my collection because, one, I want to have all of those, all of the CRKT Brian Tye knives, and two, it's a great gentleman's folder. It's a great small to medium EDC for anybody who works in an office or has to wear slacks or is concerned about weight or anything like that. Very, very good knife for all of those applications, and fairly reasonably priced, by the way. Just FYI, there is a set you can buy that has this knife and a belt buckle that kind of go together. I'm not interested in the set. I don't actually like the belt buckle that much, but maybe you would, and so I'll let you know about that. Let's get into the description of the knife a little bit. Size and weight are as follows. This knife is 7 3/8 inches open. The blade is 3 1/4 inches. One of the cool things about it is it's a full 3 1/4 inches of cutting. You can see how the way this blade is designed goes right into the cutting edge, comes right down to the handle, even a little lower. And that nice flowing shape and the double choil here in the handle are derived directly from the Tighecoon. Now, the weight on this knife is 3.5 ounces. It's just a little under 3.5 ounces on my scale, but website's listed at 3.5 ounces, so let's just call it that. And the handle thickness is just under 1/2 inch. Now you can see, I think pretty obviously, I'll do a little size comparison. So here's the Tighecoon closed. You can see that my hand almost virtually covers it. To give you a couple of knives to kind of reference, there's the SC Azula with those bottom to bottom. You can see there's the Spec 2 XL. So I would class this in the small end of medium EDC knife. Now let's get into the blade itself. The blade is 3 1/4 inches, as I said, of Aus-8 steel. It does have the two options of thumb studs or flipper mechanism, and in this case, notice the thumb studs are actually there to be used for deployment. They do function well for deployment, but here's my thing about this. Often knives will do both, and I'm sort of like, why? Because if you've got a flipper, why wouldn't you use it? It's just so much fun. And this is a knife that flips really, really well, and with the button lock, I know I'm not at the handle yet, but I'm gonna jump around just a little bit here. With the button lock, it's so fun to actuate, and this is one of those addictive knives. Sorry about that failure on my part, but this knife is one you find yourself kind of sitting, reading or working on something, and you're just flipping it open and closed, open and closed, open and closed, because it flips so nicely. When this one came, there was a little bit of blade play side to side, but that came out very easily and didn't hinder the action on the knife at all. I got a really good deal on it, so it could be that someone had it out of the box and had loosened that a little bit or flipped it a few times, and that was why. Anyway, getting back to the blade, it is a drop point blade. There's a slight thumb ramp here that is actually really useful when you're cutting your hand very naturally, and I like when you put a knife in your hand and the knife handle just tells you how to hold it. It just naturally comes together very well, and that is certainly the case with this blade. Very, very comfortable. The blade, as you can see, is very fine, comes to a pretty fine tip. It's a hollow grind, and that S curve, terminating in the bottom of the finger choil and starting at the tip, it comes directly from the Tighecoon, and it has a very distinctive look to it. It makes the knife look really, really cool and kind of fits very well with the rest of the knife, which is what you'd expect from any collaboration with a good designer. You'd expect a good flow and a good artistic element to that blade. It is a very nice satin finish. and razor sharp. Aus 8 is a really good steel. I've been very impressed with it. Even Aus 8A, I feel like, is better in terms of edge retention than 8CR13 MOV. Some people might want to argue with me about that. That's fine. But this is not Aus 8A, this is Aus 8. And a lot of the Brian Ty knives are. I know the Mai Tai is some kind of softer steel, which is a bit of a disappointment. But I'll speak to that when I have that knife in front of the camera. Anyway, blade shape is very nice, very smooth. I love the way it's just a very flowing, organic sort of shape. Extremely useful, very good blade edge geometry. And this is a thick blade stock, so it's, you know, there's not a lot of width here, so it does wedge up fairly promptly. But that's because this blade stock is pretty well 1/8 of an inch. That's great on, you know, what is a fairly cost-effective knife to get a good solid chunk of Aus 8 steel. I do appreciate that. Now, going into the handle. The handle has one thing that really made me want this knife, and that is the button lock. There's the lock right there. Notice no liner lock, no back lock, just this one little button. And Brian Ty talks a lot about simplicity, and he says, you know, I wanted to find a lock that was very simple, and the button lock seems to be just a perfect example of that. Now I'm going to see if I can show you how this works. The blade is open and therefore locked into place, and you can see here that there's this cylinder that has sort of a step down to it. You can see the wider portion there at the bottom and then the thinner portion at the top. When you push in on the button, see how the wider portion drops into the opposite handle? And by doing that, you push on that button, that releases the blade and lets it move freely. Now that the bigger portion is pushed down, the blade tang holds it in place until the knife is closed. I'm sorry, I'm moving around too much. And that blade stays that way until you open it. And I'll try to do this really slowly so you can see that button lock pop out. So you can see there's the bottom of it there, and there you go. See, it pops over into place, and that interacts with the blade tang in such a way that now the knife is locked open. It is a very simple design. It works, I'm going to say, great on custom knives. But here's the weak point of a button lock. The tolerances have to be perfect. That button has to fit exactly into that space behind the blade tang, and if it doesn't, there's no room for adjustment, there's no room for wear and tear over time. You will get some lock rock, you'll get some blade play in vertically. And this knife has just a little bit, you can't see it on camera, it's not bad at all. And in fact, when you use the knife, because you're choked up and kind of holding everything solidly, you can't get it to move at all. If you kind of do this where you get more leverage, you can get it to move just a little bit. It's not bad, not at all bad, but it's because in a production knife, that button lock is so hard, like it has to be absolutely perfect. The interaction can't have any space in it. And if you, I'll do a little, you know, if this is your button and it locks into the blade, if that button is just a little bit small, if there's even any space there, it's going to allow that blade to move. It's just the nature of that particular design. So generally they've done a pretty good job. Most button locks, they do a good job, but you need to know with wear and tear or with any slight variation in production, it's going to create some blade play for you. It's still a strong lock because of the size of that stop pin or that cylinder. It's a very simple lock. It's a very trustworthy lock. And I would recommend, Brian Ty comments on that type of lock in the Meet Your Maker video from CRKT. And so I would say go and watch that, and he'll talk about the lock mechanism, and it's a pretty neat one. And I'm definitely a fan of the button lock, probably more so in higher end blades than in the lower end, but this one does function well, and the blade, there is some blade play, I'm going to be totally honest with you, but it's barely noticeable. It doesn't bother me at all, and I'm a blade play Nazi, so that should, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I can't buy it now, if yours is anything like mine, it will not be a problem. Now, the rest of the handle is aluminum, and I couldn't tell from the video, and I'll try to see if you can tell in this video. That kind of captures it. There's kind of a bluish anodization to the aluminum. You can see it there as you see the stainless steel liners and then the aluminum scales. See the blue color to the scales. That was something I didn't notice that other videos didn't reference, and so when I got it, I was like, oh my, it's blue. It is kind of blue, and I really like the way it looks, and it does definitely add an element of sort of style, some artistry to the design. These double choils here are quite comfortable. My hand fits on the blade, but just. You can see when I take a full grip on this knife, nothing of the handle is left protruding. So it's just, you know, if it was any smaller, I would not want to carry this knife, but the way it is, it's just ideal. The finger choil is very solid. You're not moving up on that blade no matter what you do. It is very, very open. Because of that button lock, the button lock takes up an extremely small amount of real estate, so the knife can be totally open. Now, those liners are not milled out, which probably adds a little bit of weight, but it's only 3.5 ounces anyway, so who really cares about that? It is all Torx bit construction, even though it has sort of the nice looking pivot screw design. It's still just a Torx bit in the middle. And single position pocket clip. If you can kind of take a look here, there's no holes anywhere else, and the way that clip is designed wouldn't allow for any other options. It just sits the way that it sits. And you know what, in the application that I plan to put for this knife, it won't matter. And you know, I'm not, I probably prefer tip up right side, I'll admit, but it's not the end of the world. I'm not one of those people that just thinks, oh, I can't buy this knife if it's not tip up right side carry. The inserts are more of a design element. They maybe add a little bit of grip on this side, especially where your fingers kind of come into those rubberized inserts. On the other side, the pocket clip pretty much covers up the whole thing, so you don't really notice. Deployment is very nice. I said that on the blade discussion, but I'll say it again in the handle discussion. This knife is so fun to just sit there and flip. It gets a little bit addictive, actually. Very, very fun. And so overall, I really like this knife. It's very good for the purpose that I have intended it for, which is, you know, sort of a gentleman's folder, something to carry on the days when I don't want, you know, a Recon 1 or a Manix 2 XL, something that's just smaller and lighter. I wouldn't say that this is a light use knife, because aluminum and steel handle is, you know, that's a pretty tough combination. I don't think you're going to run into any issues in terms of durability. It just, you know, it's because of the size, you probably don't want to go pushing through anything crazy hard, because you don't get the same leverage on a handle that, for example, you get with this, right? This thing, you could chop a tree down. This thing, you could probably do it eventually, but you'd have to be carefuler and slower, so maybe not perfect for that. Great knife, though, for anyone who wants a smaller EDC, wants a knife that's very classy. This is a really nice looking blade, very well put together, great flowing lines, very, very smooth, very, very well finished. No issues in terms of any of that kind of aesthetic stuff. Looks great, feels great in the hand, carries really well, and just, I would think, a perfect knife for anyone who wants a smaller EDC knife, who wants a knife to carry on those days where they're not going to be able to carry their, you know, tactical folder, if you want to call it that. Just a very, very, very nice blade. So that's my take on the CRKT Tighecoon. I'll give you one last look at that very cool, very fine tipped AUS 8 blade. Really, really love the blade shape on this knife. I wish that it came in a bigger size. I wish that some, you know, I'm just a big fan of the way this blade is put together, the way that it flows into the handle, the way that it feels in hand. Everything is very good. The only sort of detractions, I would say, it's a little small for my preference, although it's perfect in size for what I want to do with it. And that button lock, although great in higher end knives where tolerances can be perfect, if there's any wear and tear, if there's any imperfection in the factory, that thing is going to produce some blade play. It just is going to. There's no way around it. There you go. Untitled Tighecoon, great knife. Obviously not quite as great as the custom knife, but for 40 bucks, and for me I think it was like $32. Great to have, you know, just a little piece of Brian Ty's mind that you can sort of carry around and be like, yeah, this is a very well put together knife. Talk to you later, YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the video.